Alright, I am back with another video, and today we are doing the fourth video of my origin character build lineup, I guess. Today we're going to be focusing on Lae'zel, the Githyanki fighter. One of the more interesting characters in the game in my opinion, and I think has one of the more interesting story arcs, especially if you do choose to play them as an origin character. But even just having them as a party member, I actually think their story arc is probably one of my favourite in the game. And honestly, I was actually really looking forward to doing this build, but it came with an interesting dilemma for me, because really, I've kind of already done Lae'zel builds, like multiple. I would say that my Psionic Warrior, my Corrupted Gith, and my, what's it called, the Twin Stars, all of those could easily work for Lae'zel, and with a little bit of maybe some headcanon chicanery, could absolutely be made to work, but I wanted to come up with something that I truly think would be connected to Lae'zel's storyline. Not just a theme of, like, psychic power, but something that, really does fit her story and the character arc she goes through throughout the game, and I think I've found it. Again, I'll try to keep this, like, as not spoilery as possible, but I kind of will be spoiling some late Act 1 stuff, but it's nothing too major, and if you know anything about D&D lore, you would have seen it coming a mile away anyway, but whatever. But that is kind of a minor spoiler warning for this video, but if you don't care and you just want to build, then let's go. We're going to be kicking things off as a fighter, namely because it's going to allow us to keep all of Lae'zel's original dialogue options, because if you don't know, if you change the class or subclass, if they have a subclass at level 1, you will actually be removing dialogue options, so we're going to be starting with fighter, just to get all the proficiencies and the constitution saving for proficiency and all that good stuff. So we might as well just start off as a fighter anyway, which is going to allow us to pick a fighting style. Now, you probably see the greatsword on my back and think, oh, we're going to go great weapon fighting here. Actually, no, we're going to be getting this later, and quite soon as well, so we might as well pick something else that's going to be useful for us, which would be archery, giving us a +2 bonus to our ranged weapon attacks, allowing us to basically just be able to use bows as a sidearm a bit more effectively, but if you don't care about that, then defense also works, but we'll be grabbing great weapon fighting a bit later, so I wanted to grab something else here. As for our ability scores, they're pretty standard for what we're trying to do. Strength at 16, this is a pretty solid number to start with. Dexterity at 12, we're a heavy armor build, so this doesn't need to be too high. Constitution at 14, because it's a nice middle ground. And Charisma at 16, because it is going to be quite an important stat for this build. As for our proficiencies, Lae'zel has the soldier background, so she comes built in with athletics and intimidation, which is pretty good. So I've just gone with perception and insight here, because, I don't know. Next up, at level 2, you have an option here. If you want to go straight to level 2 of fighter for action surge, you can, but I'm planning on coming back to fighter later, and I kind of want to get the primary levels in our main class right away, and that is Paladin. Now, you may be thinking, why would I make Lae'zel a Paladin? Well, if you saw the title of this video, which is The Bane of Vlaakith, I really wanted to focus on Lae'zel's story element of her eventually realizing the truth about Vlaakith and eventually betraying her. And I think I can kind of see the Githyanki as being paladins or, like, faithful of Vlaakith. So what if we make that that betrayal a mechanical thing? I want to make Lae'zel an Oathbreaker Paladin, because I think that or maybe an Oath of Vengeance Paladin, if you don't want to go down that whole betraying Vlaakith storyline, and you just want to go for, like, maybe, like, a loyal Vlaakith follower, then Oath of Vengeance would work really, really well, as, like, you're getting vengeance against the Mind Flayers, or the Geik. But I feel like being an Oathbreaker and betraying Vlaakith and getting those Oathbreaker abilities would actually be super, super fun for a character like this. So I'm going to quickly multi-class into Paladin here, and then what I'll do is I'm going to go break my Oath off screen so that I can show you Oathbreaker levels throughout. So let's just quickly go over something. So we'll go over this stuff quickly. If you wanted to go over Oath of Vengeance, you'd get things like Inquisitor's Might, which would give you a bit of extra radiant damage and such, but like I said, I mainly want to get Oathbreaker here, so I'll be right back. And done! As you can see here, I have become an Oathbreaker straight at level 1. It's quite easy to do, or the easiest way to become an Oathbreaker right off the bat is to unlock while playing as Lae'zel, because if you play as Lae'zel, one method is not available to you anymore, but if you free the goblin from their cage in Majoric Grove, you immediately become an Oathbreaker if you're playing Vengeance, but if you wanted to maybe break it later on in the game, you could do it in other ways, but I just wanted to show off that it is possible to become an Oathbreaker right at the start of the game, and doing so will grant you Spiteful Suffering. It is a channel oath charge action, and you basically mark a target, and that target will take an extra 1d4 necrotic damage each turn, and attack rolls against them have advantage, which is super strong, especially when you're playing a paladin, because if you get advantage, you're more likely to crit, and if you're more likely to crit, you're more likely to critical hit Smite, which is super good. Next up, at level 3, we're going to be keeping up with Paladin, meaning that now we are going to be getting the main features of Paladin, that being the Divine Smite ability, and we're also going to be able to grab our fighting style, which is Great Weapon Fighting. And the reason we decided to get Great Weapon Fighting here is because you can't actually get the Archery Fighting style as a Paladin, so we might as well grab the Great Weapon Fighting style here, and the Archery Fighting style from Fighter. We also get to prepare some spells, and the most important one I want to grab here is Wrathful Smite. It is a psychic smite that can possibly frighten the target, and meaning that they'll have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls, and they cannot move. This is a super on-theme ability for a build like this, as it allows us to keep the psychic theme that the Githyanki have, while also playing into the Paladin aspect. Yes, this costs your action and your bonus action, as well as needs some concentration to maintain the effect. However, we're not really going to be using our concentration for much else, nor do we really need to scale, because the other downside of Wrathful Smite is that you can't scale it higher with higher spell slots, but we're only going to be getting level 2 spell slots max, so we don't really care about, being able to level it up. We just want that extra psychic damage, which is what we get from this, but we can also pick up the other smites, that being Thunderous and Searing. We can also grab other kind of psychic abilities like Compel, Duel, and Command as well. So this all fits quite nicely on theme. Next up at Paladin level 3, we are going to be getting our class and subclass features. Our main class feature meaning that we now no longer are affected by disease. We also get our class actions from our Oathbreaker, that being Control Undead, in which we can spend a channel oath charge to gain control of an undead creature. Not really on theme for a build like this, but it exists, although we can go for Dreadful Aspect, letting your darkest emotions burst forth as a menacing pulse that can frighten enemies. It's a very fear-centric kind of theming with this build, and I actually quite like it. We also get Hellish Rebuke and Inflict Wounds as what would you call them, oath spells, and I feel like Inflict Wounds is slightly more on theme than you might think, because if you originally got your power from Vlaakith, well, she is a lich, so I don't know, maybe necrotic damage can make sense in your head. And we also get another spell at this level, and the game's gone and chosen Heroism, which is honestly a pretty good option. Next up at Paladin level 4, we are going to be grabbing our first feat, and I just want to take an ability score improvement to bump up our strength to 18. Now, you may be thinking, oh, well, we could use the Potion of Everlasting Vigour here, but I'm not going to, well, you absolutely could, I'm not going to be including it for the purposes of this build, because with my Origin Character Build series, I mentioned it in the Karlach video, that I've used those, both Ethel's Boon and for Potion of Everlasting Vigour for Karlach, meaning that I don't want to use it again for these builds in case you wanted to run all of my Origin builds in a single save file, but if you don't care to do that, then feel free to use things like Ethel's Boon or the potion here to bump up your strength even more, which would optimize this build further. However, I won't be doing so for the purposes of this video. So we're going to be bumping up our strength to 18 here. Next up at Paladin level 5, we're finally going to be getting extra attack, delayed by 1 level, but it's not so bad when you have such powerful attacks such as Smite. Getting extra attack a little bit later is not a deal breaker for me, but we still get it, which is pretty good. We're also going to get access to level 2 spells at this level, and thanks to our oath, we're getting Crown of Madness and Darkness, which I quite like for this build. But we're also going to get access to level 2 spells, and I'm just going to pick up the Smite that we haven't grabbed yet, that being Branding Smite, which can also be used on ranged weapon attacks, so now we have a ranged Smite, which is quite a nice thing to have. And now that we've hit level 5 of Paladin and gotten that extra attack, let's jump back to Fighter for a short moment, picking up that action surge that I mentioned earlier, which is great for any martial build, so it's nice to have it here. Now, as for your subclass, you can pick any that you like. It totally depends on what flavour of fighter you kind of want to get. You can go with Battle Master, picking up 3 maneuvers, and 4 superiority die in order to use them, giving you a bit more combat prowess, going for things like Riposte or Trip Attack. Entirely up to you if you want to get that little bit of extra utility and damage out of the maneuvers, but we're not going high enough in fighter where we're going to be able to get a ton of these, so you'd only basically have the 3 unless you wanted to take a hit to your stats to be able to grab the Martial Adept feat to get another superiority die and a couple more maneuvers. But that's entirely up to you. That is a route you can take if you wish to. I'm personally going to skip it this time. You could also go with Eldritch Knight, and leveling up in Eldritch Knight would give you more spell slots for smites, actually taking you up to level 3 spell slots. It would also give you the Weaponed Bond feature, meaning that your weapon would return to you when thrown, so you could get a little bit of that throwing build action in here, but it's not entirely necessary. But you would also get things like cantrips, and spells from the wizard list like Shield, which could be really, really useful, or Magic Missile, which I think could work quite nicely here. And it's actually quite a good recommendation. I can see you going for this, but I'm personally going to be picking Champion. But this may seem like a weird choice. Why Champion? Well, we're not going high in fighter at all, meaning we're not going to be getting those important higher level features that you'd get from playing the other two, like the increased superiority die, and the increased magic options you get from Eldritch Knight, for example. So if we're only taking a few levels in Fighter, we might as well take Champion, because this benefits Paladin in quite a major way. It reduces our critical hit threshold by 1, meaning we now roll crits on a 19 or 20, which means that we have a higher chance to get those critical hit smites off, which, as you'll see in the combat footage, if you are going to be wanting to hit those critical smites as much as possible. Now, while this build, equipment-wise, doesn't go completely into the crit reduction threshold thing, critical threshold reduction thing, I should say, get my words in the right order, you could do that if you wanted to and get a ton of, basically just get a massively, like, crit smiting paladin that crits over and over again. That would be super fun, but it's not quite what I'm building for here, but you absolutely could if you wanted to. But again, just getting that slightly higher chance to crit is always welcome for a paladin. And I feel like, again, keeping this build fairly simple, this is quite an easy build to play as well. So I'm going to go with Champion, but as you can see, I've made a case for all of these, so it really is a pick your favourites situation. And then our final level of fighter is going to be level 4 for the feat. And we're just going to go for an ability score improvement to pump up our strength to the maximum, allowing us to have the maximum amount of damage with our greatsword and bow attacks, which is super good. This is something that we want, but you could go for things like Great Weapon Master if you would like, wherever that is. It's up here, which would give you like a few more options. Like when you land a critical hit, you can make another bonus action attack, which again, if you kind of want to play into that critical hit playstyle with the equipment, you would be able to get this off a lot more, and you'd also get the additional damage. But I'm going to come up with this. I'm not personally a fan of Great Weapon Master and Sharpshooter in this game. Unless you get a ton of equipment that can offset that penalty, it never really feels worth it to have it on, because all the damage you would have done every time you miss one of those attacks could just be made up for by just not using Sharpshooter, if that makes sense. So I'm personally just going to go for ability score improvements to keep it simple, but if you wanted to go for something like Great Weapon Master, there's nothing stopping you. Now with our fighter levels complete, we have no reason to keep going in fighter because, you know, we don't need extra attack and we don't need the level 6 feature. So let's just go back to Paladin and get some more powerful stuff from there, including Aura of Protection, allowing us to add our charisma bonus to saving throws of ourselves on our allies, which is super good. We're also going to be able to get an extra spell at this level. Take whatever you like, it really doesn't matter. At Paladin level 7, you are going to also get another feature that I really, really wanted from Oathbreaker. I'm just going to quickly fix my spells because I realised in the last frame they got a bit messed up. Good. Which is the Aura of Hate. You and any nearby fiends and undead gain additional damage equal to your charisma modifier with melee weapons. So this means that now, because we have a decent amount of charisma and we can bump it up even more, you're going to get way more damage on all of your attacks, which is super nice. This is something we absolutely want. And finally, at Paladin level 8, we are going to be getting an extra feat, which means we can take an ability score improvement and bump our charisma up to 18, giving us a bit more power with things like Aura of Hate. However, if, like I say, you can go for Great Weapon Master here if you'd prefer. There may be other features you might like here, but I'm just going to be going for an ability score improvement here to get more, to be able to get higher, like better smites as well with our like Wrathful Smite and that. And also, you know, like I said, the better buff to our auras. So definitely want those. And that is the build. Overall, you're going to be getting a ton of cool things out of this build. Namely damage, tankiness, you know, various interest. But it's just damage. It's just damage, damage, damage. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it here. It's just damage. It's lots of damage. It's different ways to stack damage. It's different damage types: fire, thunder, psychic, radiant. You're getting it all. You're getting melee attacks and ranged attacks, and you're just gonna be a very bog standard, very basic, super powerful fighter. But again, playing that kind of Oathbreaker theming mixed in with the fighter levels really does play into Lae'zel's story arc, and I think could create a really, really interesting playstyle for the character. So let's get into the equipment, and I'm just going to get the elephant in the room out of the way right off the bat after I fix my ring selection. There we go. Yes, I'm going to recommend the Silver Sword of the Astral Plane. This is by far the best weapon in the game for a Githyanki, especially one that's built to be a paladin or a fighter like Lae'zel. This weapon is a +3 legendary weapon that comes with an extra 1d6 psychic damage if you are a Githyanki, and also a Githyanki holding this weapon has advantage on all mental saving throws, resistance to psychic damage, and cannot be charmed. And you also get the unique attack, Soulbreaker, which does an extra psychic damage on top of the Githyanki psychic damage, and just is super powerful and can possibly stun your enemies. This is a weapon that can be obtained in Act 1 by casting Command Drop on a certain high level enemy, and then you can pick it up straight away in Act 1. However, I understand that after I made my my Githyanki Barbarian kind of beginner's build, that a lot of people don't actually like getting weapons in this kind of cheesy way, but I feel like if I don't bring it up in this build, it is a missed opportunity for lots of power. If you don't care about doing a little bit of cheesing early on in Act 1, and you want to get a powerful weapon, this is the powerful weapon to grab for Lae'zel. You absolutely want this. However, if you would like a similar weapon, which is weaker, but can be obtained legitimately, and pretty soon after you would be able to obtain the Silver Sword of the Astral Plane through this method anyway, you could go for the Soulbreaker Greatsword. It's basically a weaker version of the Silver Sword of the Astral Plane. It gives you a 1d4 psychic damage buff instead of a 1d6. You gain a +2 bonus to your initiative rolls. It's a +1 weapon overall, and it also gets the Soulbreaker attack. Again, a little bit less powerful just because the weapon is a little bit less powerful, but will still work absolutely fine until you get this weapon legitimately in Act 3, which you can get it pretty much right at the start if you know what you're doing. But I'm going to stick with the idea that maybe you got this weapon a bit early, because you like me, you like to power build sometimes. And I like the idea of story-wise, maybe part of Lae'zel's kind of traitor arc against Vlaakith, she steals a legendary weapon in the process, which you could absolutely do, but I'm not entirely sure if it breaks Lae'zel's questline. I don't think it does from my testing, but just in case, if you really want to play it 100% safe, then the Soulbreaker Greatsword will work, and it will work just fine until you get this sword in Act 3. Let's get into the rest of the equipment now, and I'll do the ranged weapon next just because we're already on the weapons. I've picked the Dead Shot. Really, any ranged weapon will work, but if you want a decent Act 3 option that is going to play into our playstyle, this is a good option to go with, because this is going to stack with our champion feature to reduce our critical hit rate threshold even further, meaning that we now crit on an 18 or above. It also allows the wielder to double their proficiency bonus while rolling ranged attacks with this weapon unless they have disadvantage, and it is a +2 bow. But really, any bow will work up until this point. Darkfire short bow, regular longbows, anything you can think of you can throw on this build and it's not really going to matter, but then when you get to Act 3, you might as well pick this one up. But now, let's get into the armour. First up is the Grimskull Helm. Since we're going to be a frontline fighter, we might as well just get a piece of armor that works, and since this is actually one of the only origin builds I'll be presenting which can actually use heavy armor, let's use the only heavy armor headpiece in the game. Using this means that attackers cannot land critical hits against us, we are resistant to fire damage, which is a nice buff, and we also get a use of Hunter's Mark once per long rest, which we already do get, if you went with the Vengeance Paladin, you would get Hunter's Mark anyway, but since we're an Oathbreaker, we kind of lose that, so it's nice to have a different way of using it anyway. We also are going with the Armour of Persistence as our final kind of endgame armour, mainly because of the fashion. I've covered this Furnace Black and Red, and it just looks absolutely amazing on Lae'zel. But this is one of the best heavy armour pieces in the game. It gives you a flat 20 armour class, reduces all incoming damage by 2, you gain resistance and blade ward automatically. It does give you disadvantage on staff checks, but that's just all heavy armour. Once you get into Act 3, you can buy this pretty much straight away from a vendor, and I absolutely recommend it because it's awesome. However, if you want a good looking option for Lae'zel that you can obtain around the same time as the Soulbreaker Greatsword, you can go for the Psionic Ward Armour. This is a piece of medium Githyanki armour, and as long as you are a Githyanki, you have resistance to psychic damage, which is awesome. If you don't get the Silver Swords with the Astral Plane, you're still getting that psychic resistance. And whenever the wearer succeeds a saving throw against a spell, they regain a bit of hit points, which is good. It's not as... obviously it's not going to be as good as the Armour of Persistence, so you're probably going to want to swap to this once you reach Act 3, but I still think this is going to be a solid option to get you through the game until that point, when again this could be obtained in Act 1.5 or late Act 1, or whatever you want to call the crash. Next up is the Arachnia Bracers. This is going to give us a few cool things. Namely, number 1, we get the Telekinesis spell, which scales with... not scales with, but uses our strength for the check, meaning that we cast this with our strength, meaning that because we are a pure strength fighter anyway, this spell is going to work out really, really well for us. It can only be used once per short rest, but if you know with the Telekinesis spell, after you've cast it, you can keep concentrating on the spell to recast it over and over again without spending any resources, meaning that as long as you don't break concentration, you can use Telekinesis pretty much as long as you like, well, 10 turns, but you get the point. And as such, with that, you now have a really cool psychic ability that you just get to use all the time. Even though we didn't heavily focus on psychic stuff with this build, this is still really cool. You get this in kind of late Act 2, but you can pretty much just use any kind of gloves until this point. You can even grab some of the earlier gloves that just give you like a little bit of a buff to your attack rolls or something like that. But once you get into kind of that later Act 2 range, you're definitely going to want to pick these things up because they are awesome and on theme for this build. And finally, with keeping in theme with the Armour of Persistence, I've gone with the Boots of Persistence. You can get both this and the armour at the exact same time. These just give you freedom of movement and Longstrider for free, and you also gain a little buff to your dexterity saving throws. But if you want a decent early game option that I think works really nicely for a build like this, you can go with the Boots of Speed to gain a bonus action dash. For a melee fighter like us who wears heavy armor, being able to cross the battlefield quickly would actually be super nice, so having the ability to dash as a bonus action pretty much infinitely like a rogue could, is super good and works perfectly in the early game until you get something like this, which gives you a bit more movement speed anyway with Longstrider. But it's entirely up to you. You might even just want to keep the Boots of Speed if you find them to be useful enough. But again, we have some solid Act 1 options here until you get to the good stuff, and even this is Act 1 as well, so, you know, this build can come online extremely early. Next up, our accessories aren't that important, but I just kind of wanted to grab some useful utility options. First up, we have the Spell Savant Amulet. This is obtained in Act 3, but it does give you an additional level 2 spell slot. That is an extra level 2 smite, which is always welcome. This is the Ring of Free Action. I keep saying 3 as in TH, it shouldn't be. It's been a long day. The Ring of Free Action. You ignore the effects of difficult terrain and cannot be paralyzed or restrained. This is more of just kind of like a filler ring for this build. You can swap this out for whatever you like, but it's more if you decided you wanted to keep the Boots of Speed, but also wanted the kind of stuff that freedom of movement gets you from the Boots of Persistence. You can have the best of both worlds with the Ring of Free Action, because it kind of does a similar thing. However, feel free to swap this out if you do decide to go with the Boots of Persistence. And I think this is an Act 2 option too, so you can kind of get this a bit earlier than the Boots of Persistence anyway, so, you know, it's still worth picking up in my opinion. And then finally, a surprisingly good ring for this build, the Killer's Sweetheart. When you kill a creature, your next attack roll will be a critical hit. Once spent, this effect refreshes after a long rest. Now, obviously getting a critical hit as a paladin is great, but the ring's description here is somewhat misleading. You don't have to make your next attack roll you do after killing an enemy be a critical hit. You can choose to spend it at any point as a reaction. So basically, after killing an enemy, you have a free, 100% guaranteed critical hit that you can use at any time. So kill a minion in the encounter, then save that critical hit for the big boss, which means you're guaranteed to get one of your critical hit smites on. And let me just show this little combo here. If you go for something like Wrathful Smite, right? And then you spend your Executioner charge, you will be able to get the max damage on your attack, the max damage on your Wrathful Smite, and you'll also get a regular Divine Smite added on top, because that's how the mechanic works. You suddenly have a fucking nuclear attack that is guaranteed once per long rest. Which, hey, I really like that. It's a surprising amount of synergy that I wasn't expecting, and I think this ring actually works out really nicely on this build. So yeah, that is the build, and overall, I'm quite happy with this one. The idea of making Lae'zel a paladin, who maybe is O for devotion or O for vengeance is more my thing. In service of Vlaakith, then once realizing the truth about her, discovering you-know-who, she breaks her oath, literally and figuratively, going against Vlaakith, and as such becomes an Oathbreaker Paladin. I love that for this character. It just feels so cool. I just think it works out really, really nicely thematically, mechanically. You're going to be an absolute powerhouse. You still get, like, the psychic flavoring that comes with the Githyanki, thanks to things like Telekinesis and Crown of Madness and all that good stuff, but you still get all the good stuff of being a fighter with things like Action Surge, and you also get a buff to all your attacks with things like Aura of Hate, and you get a lot. And I think, like, again, if you're playing with Lae'zel in your party, most people are looking for a really simple and strong melee fighter. Again, most people would just keep her a straight fighter, maybe go Battlemaster, and just kind of have her sit and be the DPS of the team. But with this, you get just a little bit more fun. You get a little bit more intrigue, you get a little bit more stuff mechanically. Again, you're playing a paladin fighter. You're not exactly getting complexity here, but you're just getting enough to have the build feel interesting, and again, mirrors Lae'zel's character arc quite nicely. As for the end of video stuff, there's not really anything to go over. Once again, I am recording this in a big bulk kind of batch, so that I don't have to record and make videos over the Christmas holidays. So I think I will just leave this here. I'll leave you with the combat footage even. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. I'm quite proud of that one.
Leave him to me. Connect the transponder.
We must take the transponder.
You are no longer required.
Gaze turned on us. Get to the transponder.